Well, hello everybody and welcome. My name is Sharon Bonney. I'm the CEO for COABE, and I'm so delighted to welcome you to this session, This Moment Matters, leading through fiscal year 2027 federal decisions. And as we look at the agenda here, I just want to give a shout out to those of you that joined us at COABE 2026. Would you just chat in the chat box with us and let us know if you were there? We had so many present. I believe the conference had just over 2,500 that joined us with about 2,300 live. But it was so exciting. I see all these saying they were there. That's awesome. So glad that you were there. And we had a lot of really impactful sessions taking place there at the conference as well. Learning for advocacy, meetings with our state directors, meetings with our state advocate fellows, meetings with our ambassadors. So just a lot of great work that was taking place. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that all across the conference, we gave folks the opportunity to reach out to the legislators, and there was over 2,700 connections made. So give yourselves a round of applause. That was amazing to see that there was such a great response to our request to contact legislators. So now as we look at this agenda here, I see that we're going to be talking about the federal policy updates, federal level basics, the president's budget, dear colleague letter, the interagency agreement known as IAA, WIOA reauthorization, and COAB advocacy initiatives. And as we're thinking about that, we have two lovely ladies joining me here, Alicia Bold from Penn Hill Group and Erin Verbornik, the initiatives director. So I will turn it over to them and just say, welcome everyone. We're super excited you're here. So Alicia and Erin.
Well, welcome everybody. Before I turn it over to Alicia to go over the federal policy updates, just to kind of maximize your webinar experience, I wanted to share some information. So we are recording the webinar. You'll get a copy of the slides and the recording about 24 hours after the webinar ends. Because it is a webinar, you won't be able to unmute, but you can still engage by using the chat function. But for questions that you would like to have answered, please make sure that you type those into the Q&A function, just because we have so much happening in the chat. It can be hard to find each one of those questions. So please just make sure that you put them in the Q&A if we don't have time to answer those today, or if they do require a bit more digging, we'll follow up with you after the webinar with those answers. Of course, if you're like me, you might have some questions that bubble up about an hour after the webinar ends and you're thinking about it. You can send all of those questions about policy or advocacy to advocacy@coabe.org, and I will be sharing that information in the chat as well, so you have it easily accessible. All right, and with that, I am excited to turn it over to Alicia Bold from Penn Hill Group.
Thanks, Erin. So we're just going to spend a little bit of time talking about reflecting on the FY26 challenges and victories that we faced, but also looking forward to the FY27 process. I don't think I have to tell probably most people on this webinar that last year was an extremely challenging year for the adult education field. The president's budget proposed zeroing out adult education, and the House followed through on their first proposal and zeroing out adult education. FY25 funds were held up for nearly a month, which led to even further delays once those were released at the federal level for states getting out funding to local programs. And then on top of all of that, the Department of Education initiated an interagency agreement to follow through on campaign promises to close the Department of Education and shift responsibilities for the Office of Career Technical and Adult Education over from the Department of Education to the Department of Labor. That being said, despite all of those challenges, there were quite a bit of victories as well. The co-ed in adult education field really showed up, as well as our champions on the Hill, and tides were turned. FY25 funds were released after over 30,000 letters, plus calls, meetings, and more advocacy efforts from the co-ed field. And over 130 co-ed members and partners joined us for DC Flood the Hill. New members put their name on the letter in support of adult education, both in the House and the Senate. And ultimately, despite proposals by the House and by the administration to eliminate adult education funding, FY26 funding was preserved. The power of advocacy was evident in leading to this continued recognition by Congress of the value of adult education. But as we all know, the appropriations process is continuing, and the way that our federal funding structure is, we have to continue to advocate every single year and keep up the drumbeat. This year, the president again proposed eliminating adult education funding, which was disappointing, but as I know we'll get more into depth later, it is just a proposal, and it is now things turn to Congress to actually determine the funding levels for adult education. So far, the field has answered. We've seen thousands of messages sent to the Hill encouraging members of Congress to fund adult education, and I think in large part due to the efforts of co-ed members, we've already know that we've seen an increase in the number of signers in both the House letter and the Senate letter that just closed. We'll have a final list in the coming days, and plenty of resources for everybody to express our thanks to those members who stood up for the important work that you all do. Other things going on and that we're seeing, there is currently a WIOA reauthorization up for consideration in the House. It takes the version of the 2024 WIOA reauthorization, a Stronger Workforce for America Act, which was bipartisan, but this version is partisan. The bill keeps much of the 2024 agreement intact with one main difference. It goes a step further on the interagency agreement and proposes moving over OCTAE and adult education functions from the Department of Education to the Department of Labor. Since this bill is not bipartisan, we don't see it going very far. However, it is something that we are continuing to monitor and watch. We are continuing to urge Congress to co-sponsor the Adult Education Works Act, which again, I know Erin's going to talk a little bit more about, to demonstrate more and more support for adult education and the reforms that the adult education community would like to see in WIOA reauthorization. There is a lot going on in Washington and in the larger world, but adult education, where we're focused on right now, it's critical that we make our voices heard. The old adage is definitely true. If you're not at the table, you are on the menu. So as COA makes it very easy for people to raise their voice in support of adult education and engage with their members of Congress. So I keep an eye out for all of those opportunities on social media and your email, because it's true. we here in DC can say time and time again, that adult education needs to be funded, but ultimately the people that members of Congress are looking to and want to hear from is all of you. So appreciate all of the work that you all do, and I will turn things back over to Erin.
Thank you, Alicia. So if you were listening to that overview and you thought, hmm, I'm not I'm not quite sure what some of these pieces are or what that means, we're now going to kind of dig into each little piece because I know a lot of individuals are very eager to engage in advocacy, but there are a lot of questions about some of the kind of basics, some of those things that going into education we maybe didn't think that we needed to know. So we are going to start with kind of the federal level basics. So as you can see, the federal budget is what provides that kind of structure, and there's that federal funding for the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, also known as AFLA, and IELCE funding that begins in Congress and then gets signed into law by the president. You might remember back in February, that is when the last federal fiscal year's adult education funding was signed into law. It's also important to note that throughout this presentation, when I talk about fiscal year funding, we're talking about federal fiscal year. So we all think of our program fiscal years as July 1st to June 30th. However, the federal fiscal year runs from October 1st to September 30th. So now these discussions about FY27 is technically our program fiscal year 28. So we're always advocating in advance for that funding. And that funding on a kind of typical cycle would be approved the fall prior to the summer when we actually receive the funding for our programs. So WIOA reauthorization is another piece that is held within Congress. It begins in Congress. And then just an update as well, state allocation. So there were state estimates for funding released in April 2026. Um, and those will be released. Those are the estimates for what will be released to states in July of this year. Also, the interagency agreement. We are going to dig into that a tiny bit more, but just a broad overview. The Department of Education oversees the policy, the U.S. Department of Labor oversees the funding mechanisms. And then also just noting that your state budget is where you're going to see any money beyond the required state matching for WIOA and anything beyond what the federal state allocations or estimates are. As Alicia did mention, the president's budget that came out earlier this month did propose to eliminate adult education. It is really important here to note, however, that while he proposes or while his administration proposes to eliminate adult education, this is actually this is just a proposal, Congress's consideration. It is the presidential wish list. So it does not mean that adult education has been eliminated, but it does mean that it is something that the president has noted explicitly, and it might provide some insight into some of the party line voting that you may see in this upcoming year. So now a little bit about the budget. Um, Because if you are like me a couple years ago, I had no idea the difference between a mandatory and discretionary funding, um, or how in the world that related to adult education. So there are, to kind of oversimplify things, we've got mandatory funding that funds things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, unemployment insurance, and other things. These are funded automatically unless the law changes. This is where there was that big news last summer about the big, beautiful bill because that focused on changing the law around this mandatory spending. So while we acknowledge that there are pieces of that big, beautiful bill and pieces of course, much of the mandatory spending that does affect our adult learners, nothing in there directly impacted adult education funding. So, did it impact those we served and possibly even ourselves? Absolutely. But it did not directly impact our adult education funding. Adult ed funding is discretionary. That includes other things like defense and military, the current Homeland Security funding, right? That is discretionary, which is why it is pending approval. Education, including adult education, infrastructure, environment, science, foreign aid. Um, so the discretionary funding accounts for approximately 30% of the federal budget, but half of that 30% typically goes to defense. So discretionary funding requires annual renewal, and funding levels can change year to year. So that is why we have these dear colleague letters. That is why it seems like every year around this time, we are pushing people to reach out because we are doing that every year around this time. We have to continuously advocate to ensure that we are part of that discretionary budget. So please consider the outreach that you're doing. Consider how to make that sustainable because we want to create adult education champions that helps us to ease that pressure year to year, to be able to have those individuals who realize that adult education does matter. They recognize what adult education is and what it means. And then, they will be invested in it to help, bring it to the table on an annual basis. Okay, and so part of that are the Dear Colleague letters, and I'm going to turn it over to Sharon to talk a bit about what we saw this year for Dear Colleague letters.
Here we see it, folks. What we've seen for the Dear Colleague letters so far. And our goal, of course, would be that we'd have as many sign-ons as we did last year, and more. We know that this is really important, and we've seen the field really encourage their legislators. They've reached out. I want to thank Aaron Vabornik, who's reached out to many of our state advocate fellows and asked them to help and to encourage their legislators on the House and Senate, to sign that Dear Colleague letter. So our goal is to get as many sign-ons as possible. Aaron, would you come back on and say just a little bit more about on this process? I believe we have just a couple more days, correct? Where folks can still sign on.
So technically, so the House letter is over. We saw 10 new signers that hadn't signed before. On the Senate side, technically the deadline was Friday, but then Senator Reid said, you know what? I'll accept them today as well. So we'll be able to have a finalized list uh, um, at the end of today. But there has already been an increase in signers on the Senate side already. And just to point out that the Senate Dear Colleague letter is bipartisan. We do have, it was led by Senator Reid from Rhode Island, who is a Democrat, and Senator Young from Indiana, who is a Republican.
Who also spoke at our conference,
He
right?
did.
Yes, he welcomed everybody there. Um, Aaron, do you have any other final words on this piece? And I do see Razal is asking if we lost anybody, any signers from compared to last year, and I know we're still looking at that list.
So I can, yeah, Roselle, I can go through and kind of cross-reference some of the individuals. I do know that there were a couple who had signed on last year, who did not sign on again. I know one of those individuals was from Illinois. He was somebody his staff I had been in communication with, but there was turnover in the staff and I wasn't able to get through to somebody. So there are some of those. So we can absolutely share kind of the prior year signers just to be able to maybe light that fire under them and say, hey, I happen to notice that you signed on in the previous year. You didn't sign on this year. Really hope that you can show some strong support. And yes, you did catch me that I accidentally did put Reed on the Senate side twice, but that's just because he's such a champion for adult ed. Thought we'd we'd get him in there 2 times. Um, okay. So yes, if you don't see your senator on here and you did reach out, there is still time today to do some of those extra nudges, maybe even, and I hate to say this because I hate doing it, making a phone call to the office and saying, hey, just wanted to flag that I sent an email about signing on to a dear colleague FY27 funding letter. It is time sensitive. Today is the last day to sign it. Can you please bump this up in your list of priority discussions that you're having? And that is one way to kind of ensure that that is being seen.
That's great. I think we can go to the next slide. Okay.
So the interagency agreement, Alicia did talk about this a bit. So it is called the IAA, if you have heard reference to this. And basically what it was is what it sounds like, an agreement between two different agencies to move pieces of one agency's oversight into another agency. So that was done between the Department of Education, which had been the agency of oversight for all of these pieces, and moving some of the day-to-day administration, grants, management systems, and payment processing over to the Department of Labor. While there are other pieces that still are being held at the U.S. Department of Education, including the statutory authority on WIOA, the policymaking power, and the oversight responsibility for adult education. So those policies are um, coming from Department of Ed, but DOL is managing the funding and some of those administration components. As we will see here, WIOA reauthorization, something that we have been talking about now for years, is still a talking point. And I will be sharing some pieces in the chat in case you want to actually read these things on your own. If you are someone who just really enjoys reading policy, that is something, then you'll love this. But an overview here is that there are two different bills in this space. And we've gotten some questions about what is the difference between these two bills. So the first is a Stronger Workforce for America Act of 2026, also ASWA. Now, you might be thinking, didn't this happen in 2024? Well, there was a previous form of the bill in 2024 by the same name. That bill was a bipartisan bill, but Congress ran out of time to pass it. And so then the bill essentially kind of died. So this is a different version with changes. So mainly the main change is that it proposes moving all of Octay and adult education from the Department of Ed to the Department of Labor. So all of those previous pieces that we saw in the interagency agreement that are still under Department of Ed, everything would go to DOL. So this is a partisan bill currently, which means there's just one party that is sponsoring it. So this one is the primary vehicle for reauthorizing WIOA in its entirety, right? It covers the entire workforce system, like um, adults, dislocated workers, youth, Wagner Pizer, adult ed, all of those titles under WIOA. It is scheduled for markup tomorrow, April 21st. You'll see I put in the chat a direct link to the web page where if you want to watch the the committee discuss this version of a Stronger Workforce for America Act, you can. So the Adult Education Works Act exists in somewhat the same space. This is a bipartisan, bicameral bill. Bicameral meaning it's in the House and the Senate, and bipartisan meaning that it is sponsored across the aisle. As you can see here, the Senate version, sponsored by Senator Reid and Senator Young. So this is a targeted complementary bill, complementary to WIOA, that focuses on adult education only. So it includes COABE's recommendations for WIOA reauthorization. Many of these provisions have been included in a Stronger Workforce for America Act, however, not all of them. So COABE continues to advocate for all of the provisions to be included, and that is where this complementary bill comes in. So this bill really aims to strengthen adult ed programs, expand access and funding, and improve outcomes for adult learners. So hopefully that kind of sheds some light on the difference between these two, kind of the main vehicle and kind of the, for lack of a better word, sidecar, right, that complements it, but is completely adult education focused. Okay. So you might be wondering, well, how can I get more involved? All right, I am empowered with information. I am an expert of my experience. How do I put these two things together and get in front of people who need to hear this? So I'm going to turn it over to Sharon, who's going to talk about one such opportunity.
Flood the hill with us. We want to make waves on the hill. We loved our last year's Flood the Hill event in 2025. We had a full house. It was excellent. We want to invite you to join us. So you would arrive in DC on the 16th. And just a side note, we're doing this a little bit different this year. Typically, we would have folks join us on a Monday for training, and we have our legislative event on that Tuesday, followed by meetings throughout the day, but we've actually moved it. So it's Wednesday and Thursday. So you join us September 16th. We'll have a training, we'll have a nice dinner, and then the next day we'll have a legislative breakfast and briefing, and then we'll do our meetings on the Hill and debrief. And we thought this was just so impactful. We heard from so many legislators and their staff that they really enjoyed it. We are still hearing from partners who came from the DC area too, how much they enjoyed this and it helped them in their understanding of adult education. So that was really interesting to hear. But most importantly, there were so many state advocate fellows and advocates that came, as well as ambassadors, adult learner ambassadors that joined us. So I just wanted to make sure that this is on your calendar. We've also talked about, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could bring workforce partners with us? So if you are working well with a local or state employer or industry partner, maybe consider inviting them to help make the case for adult education. Last year we had NCCER as well as Merrick Brothers that joined us, and that was great. I mean, hearing them talk about the value of adult education just added to it. So just wanted to put that piece out there. We do have a sign up form that I know Aaron's going to be dropping the link into the chat box. So it's really just saving your spot so that we know you're interested. But I also want to just mention again that adult learner piece is really important too. So if you have ambassadors, trained ambassadors at your state level, and you'd like them to join us, we're working on getting funding for them to be able to join too. And I'm looking in the chat box to see if there's any questions, and it looks like there's just a couple comments that it was a great event and they're planning to go, which is wonderful. Okay, Aaron, next slide. Here's our federal priorities. So these are the ones we've completed, what's in progress and what's long term. And actually, this is, of course, just a snapshot. We do have our advocacy victories on our website as well, which gives that full list of all the different pieces we've been working on all throughout the year. But we've completed that fiscal year 26 funding, which was signed into law February 2026. Thank you to everybody who pushed so hard. I want to mention again, there was over 50,000 emails that went out last year to legislators, and that was huge and really helped push this over the fence so that we could make sure that it was signed into law. We, of course, had the push for the Dear Colleague letter signers, so thank you for that. So in progress, we have the fiscal year 2027 funding and the WIOA reauthorization, which is ongoing. And then finally, that long-term piece, increasing adult education funding. We would love to see it doubled, right? Expanding research funding for adult education and improving metrics to showcase success. I just want to say a huge thank you to the many, many organizations, programs, and people who continue to work tirelessly on advocacy and policy to protect adult education. We had over 800 signers last year on our national sign-on letter. We are submitting what we have so far this year, but we want to see that number continue to increase. Um, our priorities are to see adult education funded. That's where we're at right now, and we really want to see you help us with that piece. So, Erin, I'm going to turn that over to you.
Okay. So I did see a couple questions in the Q&A about, well, what can programs do? What is it that we can do right now? So again, please join us at Flood the Hill. Again, that link that was shared in the chat, and I can reshare it again, is just it. That is not your official registration. That is just saying I am interested in attending. Please keep me in the loop about these things, about this opportunity, um, just so that as we start to prepare, we know whether we're preparing for 100 or 500. You can also ask the head of your organization to sign on to COABE's National Sign-On Letter. I will be sharing that link in the chat as well in just a moment, but that sign-on letter is basically a commitment of support to adult education, and it is a letter that will be shared with the federal appropriations committees, both the House and the Senate levels, so that as they're having these discussions about discretionary funding and how much funding to put toward adult education, they can see the list of all of the organizations and hopefully many organizations that they know from their own states who support adult education funding. So not only do we ask that the head of your organization signs on, but if you have those key workforce partners, those employers, those businesses, um, other associations or agencies that you are connected to, please share the sign-on letter with them as well, because the more names of organizations we have on there, the more it depicts the actual support for adult education. Please continue to also use and share the 3-Click software. You'll be able to know what the most recent and current 3-Clicks is if you look at that monthly COABE Public Policy Pulse and our current calls to action. You can watch your inbox this week. You'll get the April Public Policy Pulse that will have a number of different 3-Clicks for you to use. It'll also have some sample thank you letters that you are able to use to send to any legislators of yours that did sign a House or Senate Dear Colleague letter. And then lastly, I know that we are discussing the federal level policies right now in this webinar, but I'd be remiss if I didn't also note that advocacy at the state level is really important, especially if your state budget has not yet passed. So the key dates for more than 50% of the states is April through June, when those finalized budgets are being decided on. So this is also take a peek at your state legislative calendars and see whether they're still in session. If they are still in session, they probably have not yet voted on a budget, though some may have. So take a moment to see and then reach out to your state representatives just to remind them about the importance of adult education, and especially giving some local or district level examples for them will be very helpful. Okay. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sharon.
So, what are you all doing during Advocacy April to advocate or raise visibility for adult education? We would love to hear from you. We have been really encouraging folks, use the 2-click or 3-click software, make meetings with your legislators, you know, have a meeting with the press. We've just been putting a number of ideas out there, but we'd love to hear from you what you're doing. So if you'd put it in the chat box, I see that we have folks who are speaking at their state capitol, which is awesome. Another one that's Kristen is saying she's speaking at the state capitol. Awesome. I see Mark is asking the total number of attendees at the COAB conference. We had just a little over 2,500 that attended. Just as a side note, encouraging programs to raise their voice, which is great. Okay, so I see a number of people posting here, having a lattes for literacy event locally, showing off student success and a proclamation. That's awesome. I love that. Social media to share information and success stories, attending graduation and hosting a state association day on the Hill. Wow, there's a lot going on here. Posting testimonials on our website, including legislators to visit. I am just amazed looking at all that's taking place in the field. This is so wonderful. Attending the mayor's city, Senate pro temps, and representatives connections. Awesome. Sending a letter to the senator. This is just great. So it's so encouraging to see all the great work that's taking place in the field. I just want to encourage you, whenever you do meet with a legislator, please send it over to COE. Send the pictures over. We post it to our national Padlet. Last year we had over 600 events that we posted. But also if you get some press, if you're in a newspaper or have an article in a magazine or on a podcast, share that with us too. We love to share with the field and we love to keep track of these sorts of things. And it's a way just to show that collective impact of all the great work that's taking place. So really, really exciting to see all these events and things that are being listed in the chat box. 3-part advocacy series for administrators on Title II programs is a LinkedIn post. That's great. Sharing student success stories. Okay. Well, I just want to say I see all the great work that's taking place. We're really encouraged. We are here to partner with you and support you in your efforts. We hope you'll join us at our Flood the Hill event in DC. We hope that you'll also continue reaching out to your legislators and continue doing all the great work that you're doing. And before we go, I'd like to have Aaron or Alicia come back on if they have any last comments.
So yeah, I am just trying to catch up with reading. It's like a waterfall
Awesome.
of just wonderful things that are happening. I did share a link to the sign-on letter for individuals to um, ask organizations to do. So it is an organization or a company sign-on letter. And then also I posted in the chat all of these awesome activities and events that you're having. Please send the information about them and the pictures after the fact to padlet@coabe.org. Even if you have a meeting with a legislator and they you ask for a picture and they kindly say sorry, no, that is okay. You can still share with us that you had that meeting and we'll be able to put it up on the Padlet as well. So we'll add anything on there that you are willing to share. I will also just say that um, again, any questions that you have after the fact, I see a lot of really good questions in the Q&A. We are going to take these back to our public policy team at Penn Hill Group and get a lot of policy analyst eyes on it to ensure that we are getting you the most accurate information. And we will be sure to share that back out not only with the individual who asked the question, but with anybody who did attend, register for the webinar. So please keep your eyes out. We'll be sure to share all of the answers to those questions with you. And again, just a reminder, tomorrow is that markup if you want to watch it live. Also, you can stop by later and join it and rewind, or you can also watch it after the fact. And then, Alicia, I don't know if you have any final words that you would like to say as well.
No, just thank you. I just dropped the markup link in the chat. I know there were a couple people who are looking for it. It's also on the Education and Workforce Committee's website. So if you need to find it again later, don't grab it in the chat. That's where you can find it. But to Aaron's point, you can pause, rewind, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you everybody for being here. And I mean, just coming off of the conference and all of the energy at the conference, just the sheer number of individuals who did the 3-click software who came up and said, I'm interested in doing things, but I'm not quite sure how. Please know that COABE is here to support you along your advocacy and adult ed visibility path, no matter where you are starting. Please reach out to advocacy@coabe.org and we will assist you. And now some final words from our CEO, Sharon Bonney.
Thank you, Erin. And I just want to say we had 485 people that signed up for this web us today. We will be back answering your questions, as Erin said, but just know we're here for you and we really want to support you every step of the way. So anytime you have a question, email us at advocacy@coabe.org. We'll get back to you within 24 hours. But in the meantime, just keep up the great work and we hope to see you at Flood the Hill event there in DC in September. Thank you, everyone. Bye now.